Hello. I want to talk today about whether or not UFO secrecy is crumbling. I've been studying UFOs for 25 years, and for most of that time, it seemed that researchers like myself and many others were just howling into the wind. Despite the books, the articles, the conferences we would go to, the occasional mainstream media coverage, it never seemed to make a difference. We'd continue on in our little bubble, talking to ourselves, talking to the rest of the world, but not having the rest of the world listen to us. They would continue seemingly to go on as if we didn't exist. There's always been a certain level of interest in UFOs, for sure. In fact, I would say there's always been a kind of hidden interest shared by quite a few people, and not always something that they'd been aware of. I'd often find it while having one-on-one conversations with folks, and after talking about this subject for a few minutes, I could see their eyes lighting up. It's like they just discovered, wow, this is fascinating. Like discovering a hunger they've always had, but just didn't realize that they had it. And that's because I feel when something important is going on in our world, something that affects many, many people, and yet those people are not truly permitted to have an open, honest discussion about the subject, well, that's a discrepancy. That's a problem. In fact, it's a common thing around the world. I think it's connected to all sorts of ideas and situations, but I usually find it as something to do with power. That is when, how do I want to say this? That is what's allowed to be discussed openly in a society and what isn't. There are official truths, as it were. There's official truths like that we're all supposed to believe. Your television, your corporate radio are all too willing to tell you what you're supposed to believe. And more, it's the major internet media like Google, YouTube, Facebook, all the rest that want to curate your news and become the finger-wagging moral police that everyone supposedly needs. Well, those are the official truths. And then there's the things that people, smart people, well-informed people, actually, that these people believe. I call them the unofficial truths. I've known for a long time that the UFO reality is one of these unofficial truths that we, as a civilization, have been dealing with for as long as I've been alive, and in fact, for much longer than that. When I was researching this for the first time in my life back in the 1990s, and even after I moved into the more public arena after, say, 2000, 2001, UFOs were still very much something that was separated out from the mainstream consensus reality, was separated out from official truth. And I would say this situation continued right up until around 2017 or so. And up until that time, I think it's fair to say that a number of UFO researchers wondered, how long would this discrepancy continue? How long would it take for some kind of movement on this issue? Were we just all spinning our wheels? Maybe you could say this actually started to change in 2016. And there was that odd moment when Hillary Clinton's talking to Jimmy Kimmel about UFOs on his TV show. Or actually, as she corrected him, UAPs. I jumped on that right away as a rebranding of UFOs. And indeed, in retrospect, that was the case. And that was a very key moment, I think, in our recent cultural history on this. Steve Bassett, longtime UFO activist, and now by this time, he's an old friend of mine. It's funny to think of it that way, but it's true. I think Steve may well have had some impact on this, since at that time he was hammering the theme that Hillary would be the UFO disclosure president. He had his reasons for thinking this, and I publicly disagreed with him more than once, but the fact remains that he posted many links on his website discussing Hillary's connection to the so-called Rockefeller Initiative of 1994. Fascinating piece of UFO history, indeed, that no one was talking about. So Steve was contacting countless media outlets to remind them that Hillary Clinton did, in fact, have a significant connection to the UFO issue back in the 1990s. And from my view now, it's not impossible to think that his efforts did have some effect in raising UFO consciousness among journalists in the mainstream media. But of course, Hillary Clinton didn't get elected president. She didn't get the chance to be the disclosure president, however likely or unlikely that would seem to have been. But what did happen is that other things were percolating. During that same time, the singer Tom DeLonge was talking behind the scenes with some heavy hitters. Major General William McCaslin, who formerly commanded the U.S. Air Force Research Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He was talking with Major General Michael Carey of U.S. Space Command. He was talking with Robert Weiss, who was heading Lockheed's famous Skunk Works division. And of course, he was talking with Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, John Podesta. Google Hangouts, emails, all about UFOs. Then, of course, it got exposed by WikiLeaks, and the big shots go scampering, and DeLonge is soon surrounded by Team 2. Another impressive group of folks, to be sure. That becomes To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, TDSA, and they have their big intro event in October 2017. And just 2 months after that, the New York Times and Politico published pieces on UFOs, UAP, that rocked the UFO community and actually even surprised the rest of the world. UFOs still being investigated by the Pentagon? Yes. UFO sightings still happening to our military and our pilots? Yes. UFOs still constituting some sort of mystery? Yes. UFO artifacts actually having been recovered and studied? Yes. That is amazing. There are people even now who downplay the significance of all of that. I can't understand it. One researcher, actually, and I remember this quite well, I'm going to leave names out of it for this time, but one researcher immediately called the New York Times piece an actual false flag, which, okay, that's just wrong on so many levels. But what is true is that there has been a definite spin going on with the coverage, that's for sure. I've talked about this spin in the past, and I will talk about it again. For now, I just want to point out that 2017 was only the beginning. For the past 2 years, things have been moving very fast. And I'll be the first to admit, faster than I would ever have predicted. Throughout 2018, especially 2019, this year, UFOs or UAP, or however you want to discuss them, are being talked about without the snark, without ridicule, in a way that opens the door in our society for a genuine conversation about, if nothing else, the fact that this phenomenon is real. That alone is a landmark. However else it's currently being interpreted, the discussion is now on. And then there's the major leak that's recently occurred, which I've been discussing and writing about quite a lot. The leak of documents coming from the late astronaut, Dr. Edgar Mitchell. We don't, or at least I don't, know the full quantity of what has leaked, but information is coming out. And by the way, many of us are continuing to work quietly on this information and will definitely have more to share with you. Most dramatic, of course, are the 15 pages of notes that Edgar Mitchell had concerning the interview between Dr. Eric Davis and retired Admiral Thomas R. Wilson. Talked about this a lot. The information in those notes concerns Wilson's discovery of a deeply classified special access program concerned with reverse engineering, incredibly advanced non-human technology. And it also concerned how Wilson, who by his position in the Joint Chiefs of Staff should have had regulatory authority over that program, was nevertheless denied access to it. Got a situation of runaway secrecy dominated by private contractors to the United States government. This is a leak that's not going to go away, even though there are some ideologically driven skeptics who are employing mental gymnastics to deny that any of this matters. Doesn't matter. It's a lost fight for them. The real question is, where is all of this going to lead us? Are we seeing the end to UFO secrecy? Well, long before this recent upsurge in UFO media coverage, I have been trying to puzzle out just how UFO secrecy might end. And if it did end, how would it affect our society? It's been nearly a decade since Bryce Zabel and I co-authored what is still the only book-length treatment on this question, AD after disclosure. I'm hoping when all is said and done, maybe we'll have gotten a couple of things right in there. At the time, I concluded that the UFO secret was so profound, so valuable, so transformative, so profitable to those who had it, that it had gone on for so long that nothing short of some unforeseen event would break it. A major sighting, a major undeniable leak, something along those lines. The good news, as I saw it back then, was that the secret keepers were not the only part of the equation, and that we, our society, were in a rapid state of transformation, so much so that there would be many opportunities for something like these types of events to occur to break that secrecy. I often describe the end of UFO secrecy as a paradox, impossible, but inevitable. Impossible because there was no motivation that I could see for anyone to initiate it, but inevitable because it's impossible to stop the tide of history, because no secret can last forever, because our society is in such a state of constant transformation that we have to expect something very different in our future than what we experience today. I look at the tide of history and I see those basic principles still in effect. I mean, not only is this not the 1950s or 1960s, it's not even the 1990s or the early 2000s. The interconnectivity that we are seeing in this world alone, I mean, just that factor alone is such a disruptive force to the old ways of doing things that we might well expect it to corrode secrecy on UFOs. But there are many other factors in our world that beyond interconnectivity that are also happening. The ever-increasing power of our computers and of our software, our ever-increasing ability to do genuine research and ferret out answers to all sorts of areas of our world. So having said all that, you might think that I'm assuming the end of UFO secrecy is about to happen and that we're going to see full disclosure of the truth. And let me just say that no, I am not predicting that at all. For decades, there have been many hints that there is a deep, deep nature to this secret, and that the truth would be too hard for the world to know. And I'm not saying that it is, but supposedly Kelly Johnson, the great head of Skunk Works, said something like this. The researcher Donald Kehoe, back during the 1960s, was also told something of this sort. I was once told very reliably, in my view, of how President Jimmy Carter was reduced to tears after his briefing on this situation in 1977. And just recently, I spoke to a close friend who told me of a meeting he had with a former very high-level official from the Reagan administration who made it clear to him that not only was this phenomenon very real, but maybe that we humans were completely outmatched and maybe not even in control for all he knew. These are rumors. I know that they're just rumors, but there's countless more of them, and you can't help but wonder, is there a truth to this? Is there something to this phenomenon so profound that the secret keepers are just shuddering at the thought of letting it all out? And then there's the concept of a breakaway civilization. So let's say that there was indeed a breakthrough in gravity research back in the mid-1950s, as many people have suspected. And let's assume furthermore that that breakthrough went black, deeply secret, that it continued, that it enabled other opportunities for that classified world to explore, enabling them basically to go far beyond what we are officially able to do in our society and what we are able to know officially in our society. And to me, it's a big guess as to how far such a group's been able to go, with what technologies, with what science. But I do think it's entirely probable that they are much farther along than we are, maybe a great deal farther along. So my question is, can a UFO disclosure reveal all of this? So here's what I think is happening. A soft disclosure is going on, a controlled disclosure. which I've called this a number of times. I don't know how high up this is being authorized. I do suspect, I would say I suspect strongly that it's being led by a faction, some sort of faction. So this would be a faction that has to contend not only with a very skeptical UFO community that's dealing with it right now, a very skeptical elements of the mainstream media and the political world, some of which are not just skeptical but hostile, but also members from within the world of the military and intelligence world that are not happy with these new revelations about how, say, UAP are outclassing our top Navy fighter planes and so on. Not everyone's going to be happy about that. On top of this, you've got this faction promoting UFO disclosures. Got to do this. They're doing it so gingerly, so selectively, that the spin is staring us right in the face. It's impossible not to see that for all that's being revealed, a lot is being concealed as well. Now, unlike some other people who are analyzing all of this, I'm not necessarily seeing this as disinformation in the classic sense. And I don't yet see this as nefarious or negative. Not necessarily. It's possible to interpret what's happening as baby steps rather than as disinfo. But I will say, even so, it is undeniable that there's a certain spin to all of this. The whole long history of UFO encounters has been drained right out, as if all those years never happened, and so much more. When I wrote After Disclosure back in 2010, I did not see the rollout of such a controlled form of disclosure. What I saw was an avalanche, and that is why I assumed it would never happen voluntarily. But what we are seeing is most likely a push emanating from a faction. And furthermore, there is every possibility of that avalanche happening. It's very evident to me that some people who have been commenting on all of this don't really have a good grasp of the full dimensions of the UFO phenomenon, and certainly not the history. That's obvious. And they underestimate something, that this subject can't easily be tamed. And it has never been properly controlled, not ever. The reality of this phenomenon is too wild. It is too uncontrollable. And that makes the secrecy inherently unstable. And especially as more toothpaste keeps coming out of the tube, each new revelation is going to lead to new questions. I am telling you, it is an inevitability that we will hit the moment of critical mass, the tipping point. That is when the sum total of the openly acknowledged reality of all this leads to an avalanche of questions that make the idea of controlling this subject a very fond illusion. Now, what I can't say, because I don't know, is when do we get to that moment? What I will say is that these last 2 years have moved us much closer to that moment than I could possibly have predicted prior to that. A lot of things are converging on us in this very interesting civilization of ours. The UFO cover-up is one of the things that in the years ahead seems to me to have a definite expiration date. Well, that's all I got for you today. If you are interested in these types of updates from me, I would say please do subscribe to my YouTube channel, hit the like button, select notifications. You can also visit my website, richarddolanmembers.com, for additional articles, audio, video releases. Thanks for being here with me. Catch you later.